I never expected that signing up for language lessons would turn into the most awkward, confusing, and honestly kind of thrilling experience of my life. Like, you think you're just going to learn how to say, "Where's the bathroom?" in French, and next thing you know, your language tutor is standing way too close, and suddenly your homework involves way more than just conjugating verbs. Okay, let me back up a little. So I'm Mark, 28, living in this mid-sized city where chances to meet interesting people are, well, pretty limited unless you count the occasional bar or coffee shop. I'd been trying to pick up French for a while, mainly because I wanted to travel and sound less like a total tourist when I finally made it to Paris. Online apps worked okay, but felt pretty lonely and slow. That's when I decided to try in-person tutoring. Figured a real person could kick my butt into gear. Enter Julien. He's this guy in his early 30s, originally from Lyon, who's got this casual confidence that's impossible to ignore. We met at the local library, where he holds his tutoring sessions. He's tall, with this soft French accent that makes every sentence sound like a lyric, and he wears glasses that somehow make him look both smart and effortlessly cool. The kind of guy you might secretly Google after a first meeting, which, yes, I totally did. Our first lesson was textbook normal. We went over basic phrases, greetings, and I tried not to sound like a complete idiot stumbling through the guttural R sounds. Julien was patient, smiling easily, correcting me without making me feel like a lost cause. I figured this was going to be a pretty straightforward thing. Show up, learn a bit, practice exercises, rinse and repeat. But then he handed me my homework. I was expecting something like, write 5 sentences in French, or practice these verbs. Instead, he said, "For this week, I want you to practice with me. We'll meet twice more before our next official lesson, and I'll help you with your pronunciation in person." I thought, okay, that's fine. More practice is good, right? The second session arrived, and as soon as I walked into the little cafe where Julien suggested we meet, I noticed something different. The usual gap between teacher and student felt smaller. We sat closer than I expected, and when he corrected my accent, his fingers brushed against my hand. I laughed it off, but inside I was kind of freaking out. Was this just him being friendly? Because honestly, this guy was way too charming to be just a tutor. By the third time, things got straight up confusing. Julien said we were going to do some pronunciation drills, but half the time it felt like he was using those drills as an excuse to touch my arm, lean in close, and smile in a way that made me suddenly forget every French word I'd ever learned. I caught myself staring at him way more than I should have, and I'm pretty sure he noticed. The weirdest part? I was actually looking forward to these sessions. Like, way more than I thought I would. I'd never been the type to get butterflies over a tutor, but Julien had me second-guessing everything. Was I just imagining things? Or was he actually flirting? And if he was, what did that mean for me? Because I'd never really done the whole dating thing with a guy before. Hell, I wasn't even sure where to start. So here I am, stuck between desperately wanting to improve my French and trying not to let my feelings get tangled up in what was supposed to be just homework. And honestly, it's a mess. But maybe that's exactly what makes it so interesting. Trust me, by the time I look back on this, I'll probably laugh at how clueless I was. But right now, I'm just trying to keep up with the language, with Julien, and with whatever the hell this is turning into. So after that third session, I found myself walking home with this weird mix of excitement and panic buzzing in my chest. Like, I was genuinely smiling at nothing, replaying every little touch and glance Julien had tossed my way. I'd never been great at reading people, especially when it came to stuff like this, but something about him felt different. Like he wasn't just being polite or professional. The next day, I texted him, partly because I wanted to practice my French, but mostly because I needed to know if I was completely reading the situation wrong. I sent a dumb message like, "Merci pour la leçon d'hier. Your pronunciation drills are harder than I thought." It was light, but I was hoping he'd pick up the hint. He replied almost immediately, "Haha, you're improving quickly, maybe too quickly for a beginner. Are you sure you're studying or just distracted?" The teasing in his message made my heart skip, and I swear I reread it 5 times before typing back, maybe a little distracted. I wanted to text more, but decided to hold back and wait for our next session. That Saturday rolled around, and Julien suggested we switch things up from the cafe to a little park nearby. We spread out a blanket under a tree, notebooks and coffee cups between us. The sun was warm, the breeze light, and for some reason, everything felt charged. Maybe it was the way the light caught his hair, or how he smiled when I stumbled on a tricky phrase. We got into the lesson, and Julien pulled out this old postcard from Lyon, showing me a picture of a street market, pointing at the signs, asking me to name the fruits and vegetables. I butchered most of it, but he just laughed softly and corrected me, leaning a bit closer than necessary. I felt it again, that spark, that quick jolt whenever his fingers brushed mine while turning the pages. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Mark, French is not just about words. It's about feeling, about connection, it's about trust." I blinked, not sure if I'd heard right, or if he was just giving me some weird motivational pep talk. He looked me in the eyes, and the seriousness in his gaze caught me off guard. "You're doing great, but if you want to really learn, you have to open up." Before I could answer, Julien reached out and gently took my hand. Not in a tutor helping a struggling student way, but like someone who wanted me to feel something real. My heart was pounding, loud enough, I was sure, that the ducks on the nearby pond could hear it. I pulled my hand back awkwardly, coughing. We should probably get back to the lesson." I was trying to keep my voice steady, but failing miserably. He chuckled. "Relax, Mark. I'm just being honest. You're more than a student to me." The words hit me like a splash of cold water. I wanted to say something clever, but all that came out was, "I didn't know tutors did that." Julian's smile faded for a moment, replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable. "I don't usually, but with you, it feels different." We sat in silence after that, the kind that doesn't feel awkward but charged, like the moment before a storm. I wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to confess my own tangled feelings, but my throat was too dry. Instead, I just nodded, hoping he understood. Our last lesson of the week was supposed to be about practical conversation, but it turned into something else entirely. Julien suggested we practice ordering food at a nearby bistro to get me comfortable speaking in public. I was nervous, but he held my arm lightly as we walked, giving me this quiet confidence I didn't know I had. At the bistro, he coached me through the menu, whispering corrections in my ear that sent shivers down my spine. After we ordered, we sat outside, and Julien asked about my life, work, family, dreams. I told him about my dead-end office job, my plans to finally take that trip to Paris, and how I always felt like I was missing something, but wasn't sure what. He listened intently, his hand finding mine again, fingers entwining naturally. "I think you're scared to find that missing thing," Julien said quietly. "Maybe because it means changing everything." I looked at him, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't just scared. I was curious about who this guy was, about what might happen if I stopped playing it safe. On the walk back, Julien stopped suddenly and turned to face me. "Mark, I have to be honest. I'm not just your tutor. I like you. More than I probably should." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I stammered, I like you too. I just didn't know how to say it." He smiled, that soft, genuine smile that made all my doubts disappear for a second. Maybe we don't need words all the time. And then without another word, he leaned in and kissed me. The world seemed to tilt sideways, and all the lessons, the homework, the French words I'd been struggling with, melted away into this perfect, unexpected moment. I pulled back slightly, breathless and grinning like an idiot. "So, what does this mean for the homework?" Julien laughed, eyes sparkling. "Let's just say the homework got physical." And honestly, I had no idea where this was headed, but for the first time in my life, I was excited to find out. After that kiss, everything felt electric, but also kind of surreal. I mean, here I was, the guy who signed up to learn how to order a croissant in French, and now I was standing in the middle of the street, holding hands with my tutor, Julien, who just basically confessed he liked me. Like, really liked me. It was exciting, but also terrifying, because I had no idea where to go from there. We didn't rush anything. Julien smiled softly, squeezing my hand before pulling me gently toward a nearby bench. We sat side by side, and I could feel my heart thumping like a drum solo. "So, what now?" I asked, trying to sound casual but probably failing miserably. Julien looked at me like I'd just asked the most obvious question in the world. "Well, if you want, we can keep seeing each other. Not just for lessons." His voice dropped just enough that I caught the vulnerability beneath the confidence. I blinked, the weight of those words sinking in. "You mean like a date?" He nodded, that shy smile creeping back onto his face. "Yeah, maybe more than just a date. Maybe something real." I swallowed hard. This was new territory for me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. But then again, when was I ever ready for anything good? "Okay," I said. And it sounded way more enthusiastic than I expected. "Yeah, I'd like that." Julien's grin was like the sunrise, warm and impossible to ignore. We spent the next hour just talking, not about French or grammar or homework, but about everything else. Our families, our favorite movies, the weird little quirks that made us who we are. He told me about growing up in Lyon, the markets his mom used to drag him to, the way the city smells after it rains. I told him about my childhood, my awkward teenage years, how I'd always been a bit lost but hopeful. By the time the sun dipped low, casting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I realized I was already starting to care about this guy in a way I hadn't expected. The next few days were a whirlwind. We kept up our lessons, of course, but they became something else entirely. Our homework now included long walks, where Julien would test my French by asking me all sorts of questions, making me laugh when I messed up. Sometimes, he'd challenge me to order food by myself at little cafes, and he'd watch proudly from across the room, cheering when I nailed it. One night, after a particularly good lesson, Julien invited me over to his place to study and maybe practice some conversational French. I was nervous as hell, mostly because I wasn't sure if my nerves were about the language or about him. When I arrived, his apartment was cozy and filled with the kind of clutter that made it feel lived in. Books on every surface, a record player spinning soft jazz, and the faint scent of fresh coffee. We sat close on the couch, notebooks forgotten, as Julien traced French phrases on the back of my hand and whispered corrections that sent tiny shocks through me. When he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, I caught my breath. We both knew this was more than tutoring now. "Mark," he said softly, "I want to know everything about you, not just your French skills." I laughed, nervous but genuine. That sounds kind of scary. He smiled, brushing his thumb over my knuckles. Maybe, but also worth it. Before I knew it, we were kissing again, slow and sure, like we were learning the rhythm together. It felt less like homework and more like discovery, like every touch was a new word we were inventing. Over the next few weeks, things between us blossomed naturally. We kept our lessons, but the focus shifted from grammar drills to shared coffee dates, late-night talks about dreams and fears, and quiet moments that felt charged with something deeper. Julien was patient with me, understanding my hesitations, and somehow made me feel safe to explore this new side of myself. One afternoon, we were sitting in the park, lounging on a blanket, much like our first real lesson outside, when Julien suddenly reached into his bag and pulled out a little notebook. "What's that?" I asked, curious. He flipped it open to a page filled with messy handwriting. "It's a list of all the places in France I want to show you someday. The best markets, hidden cafes, little towns where you can hear the mountains breathe." I smiled, touched by how thoughtful it was. "Sounds like a pretty good homework assignment." Julien laughed. "Maybe the best one yet." That moment felt like a turning point. I realized I wasn't just learning French anymore. I was learning how to fall for someone in a way that was honest and a little terrifying, but also exhilarating. There were still moments of doubt, of course. Times when I wondered if Julien was just being kind because it was easy, or if I was reading too much into things. But those doubts always faded when he looked at me with those tired, genuine eyes and told me, "You're worth the risk." Looking back, I never thought my language lessons would turn into anything close to this. But sometimes, the best things happen when you stumble into the unknown. Stumble into someone who challenges you in all the right ways. Who knew that homework could feel like falling in love? Things between Julien and me had settled into this surprisingly comfortable groove, like we'd found a rhythm that worked, both in language and in whatever this was turning into. But, as you'd expect in real life, nothing stays perfectly easy for long. One evening, a couple weeks after that list of places moment in the park, Julien invited me over for dinner. It was his idea to cook something French. He was always a bit of a foodie, and I figured it was a perfect chance to practice my cuisine vocabulary and get to know him better. I showed up with a bottle of wine, because priorities, and he met me at the door with that signature crooked smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. His apartment smelled amazing, like garlic, herbs, and something delicious baking in the oven. There was soft French pop music playing in the background, and candles flickered on the kitchen table. I felt a little out of place, as usual, but he waved me into the kitchen like this was all totally normal. "So, ready to cook like a Parisian?" he teased, handing me an apron. "I'm more likely to burn the place down, but sure," I joked. We started chopping vegetables and swapping bad French jokes, him correcting my pronunciation, me trying not to cut myself on the peppers. The closeness made it impossible not to notice how good he smelled, how his laugh was contagious, and how his eyes flicked to mine just a little too often. As we moved to the living room with plates piled high, Julien lit a cigarette on the balcony. I didn't even realize he smoked until then, and something about watching him take that long drag, the way the smoke curled around his face, made me feel anxious, curious. I wasn't sure. "Want one?" he asked, holding out the pack. I hesitated. "I don't really smoke." He smiled softly. "Me neither, usually, but sometimes." He shrugged like it was no big deal, but I caught the flicker of something else. Maybe a little vulnerability? I nodded and took one anyway, curious to see what it was about. We sat close together, the city noise humming beneath us. Julien's fingers found mine again, and I realized how natural it felt to just hold his hand. "So," I said, trying to sound casual, "how long have you lived here?" "Almost 5 years. I moved for work, but never really left." He exhaled smoke, watching it disappear into the night. "It's home now." There was a pause, and I could tell there was more he wanted to say. "You?" he asked finally. I shrugged. "Born and raised here, but I've always felt like something was missing, like there was more to life outside these streets." Julien nodded. "I know that feeling. That's why I love Lion, and why I keep wanting to show you my world." I looked at him, heart tugged in a way I hadn't expected. "I want to see it," I said quietly. "All of it," he smiled, his eyes softening. "We'll make it happen." Promise. That night, after he walked me to the door, we lingered for a long moment, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye. Then Julien leaned in and kissed me again, this time slower, more sure. I felt like I could melt right there on the doorstep. But then, just as I was about to step inside, he pulled back and said, "Mark, I want to be honest. There's something I've been meaning to tell you." My stomach flipped. "What's up?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not just your tutor and guy you're dating. I'm also dealing with some stuff. Family stuff, personal stuff. It's not easy for me to talk about, but I want you to know because I don't want secrets between us." I nodded, heart racing with a mix of nerves and empathy. "You can tell me anything." Julien took a deep breath. "I'm not out to my family, not fully. It's complicated. There's pressure, expectations. I'm scared it might change everything." I was silent for a moment, trying to find the right words. "That sounds hard, but I'm here. Whatever happens, you're not alone." He smiled, a little relieved. "Merci, Mark. That means a lot." That vulnerability only made me care more. Suddenly I realized this wasn't just about us learning French or flirting. It was about two guys trying to figure out how to be honest with themselves and each other in a world that doesn't always make it easy. Over the next days, Julien seemed a little quieter, more guarded at times. I wanted to reach out, to be patient and give him space, but also remind him I was there. So I sent a simple message one evening. Hey, want to meet up? I found a new French film we could watch. He replied quickly, I'd like that. We met at his place, curled up on the couch with blankets and popcorn. The movie was about a complicated love story in Paris, full of longing and missed chances. Halfway through, Julien shifted closer, resting his head on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. After the credits rolled, I looked at him and said, we're writing our own story. Messy, imperfect, but ours. He smiled, eyes shining. And I don't want it to end. That night, as I walked home, I realized how much I'd grown. I wasn't just learning to speak French. I was learning how to open my heart, to take risks, and maybe, just maybe, to find something real. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There were uncertainties, fears, and things we still needed to figure out. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't walking it alone. Because sometimes the best lessons aren't in textbooks or grammar drills. They're in the moments where you let someone in, even when the homework gets physical, emotional, and way more complicated than you ever expected. So things had been going really well between Julien and me, good enough that I started thinking about what it would actually mean to be together with someone, especially someone who wasn't just my tutor anymore. But, as with most things in life, just when I was starting to get comfortable, life decided to throw in a curveball. It happened on a Tuesday. I was at work, sitting in this cramped office cubicle that smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation, when my phone buzzed with a message from Julien. Just a simple text. Can we talk, face to face? For a second, my stomach dropped. That kind of message never meant, hey, want to hang out and watch movies. It usually meant serious stuff, and in my experience, serious stuff sometimes meant things were about to get complicated. I shot back, of course. When? Tonight. Same place meant his apartment. I agreed and spent the rest of the day trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. I mean, I knew Julien had mentioned some family stuff before, but I wasn't sure if this was going to be about that or something else entirely. When I arrived that evening, Julien was already waiting, standing by the door with those deep, dark eyes that suddenly looked a little heavier than usual. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't the easy, teasing smile I'd grown used to. It was more serious, like he was bracing himself. We sat down on the couch, the silence between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Julien took a deep breath and said, Mark, there's something I have to tell you. It's about my visa. My brain froze. I didn't even know he was on a visa. Your visa? I thought you said you were living here for work? He nodded. I am, but it's temporary. I've been renewing it, but the process is getting complicated. The government is tightening rules, and I might not be able to stay much longer. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Wait, so you might have to leave? Julien's smile slipped. Yes, and I haven't told you earlier because I didn't want to worry you before I knew for sure. I wanted to say something reassuring, but words tangled in my throat. The thought of losing him after everything felt unbearable. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I finally managed. Because I was scared. Scared it would change things between us. Scared I'd have to say goodbye. His voice cracked a little on the last word, and suddenly he looked vulnerable in a way that broke my heart. We sat there, both quiet, the weight of all this new reality sinking in. I wanted to reach out, to hold him, but I was also scared. Scared of what this meant for us. After a few tense moments, I swallowed and said, Julien, I don't know how long you have or what's going to happen, but I want to be with you, no matter what. His eyes shone, and he pulled me into a hug that felt like the only safe place in the world. Merci, Marc. That means everything. The days that followed were a strange blend of hopeful bliss and looming uncertainty. We kept going on our little adventures around the city, practicing French, cooking together, and stealing kisses in quiet corners. But underneath it all was this ticking clock we couldn't ignore. One Saturday, we found ourselves at a tiny bookstore tucked away near the river. Julien was flipping through a book of French poetry, and I was admiring how his eyes lit up when he read aloud a line that made him smile. Mark, he said softly, what if we try for something more permanent? Maybe I could apply for a work visa or a residency? It won't be easy, but I don't want to lose this. I was stunned. "You'd do that? For me?" He shrugged. But there was a fierce determination behind it. "For us. For this." I reached out and took his hand, feeling like I was holding onto something precious and fragile. "Let's do it." The idea of fighting for our future together made me feel more alive than I had in years. It wasn't just about language anymore. It was about building a life, despite the obstacles. But even with that newfound hope, there were days when Julian's anxiety bubbled to the surface. One evening, as we lay tangled in his bed, he confessed, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, asking you to wait for me when I don't know what will happen." I kissed the top of his head. "You're not being selfish. You're being brave, and I'm here." Those words felt like a promise, not just to him, but to myself. As the weeks went by, we navigated the messy bureaucracy of immigration paperwork, appointments, and endless forms. Julian's charm and determination helped, but the process was slow and frustrating. Through it all, I learned more about him, his fears, his hopes, the family he'd left behind, and the dreams that kept him moving forward. I realized that love wasn't just about butterflies or stolen kisses. Sometimes it was about showing up day after day, even when things felt uncertain. One night, after a particularly exhausting day at the immigration office, we sat on the rooftop of his building, looking out over the city lights. Julian leaned on my shoulder and whispered, "No matter what happens, I'm glad I met you." I squeezed his hand. "Me too." And in that moment, with the city sprawling beneath us and the future still unwritten, I knew this was just the beginning of something real, something worth fighting for. Because sometimes love isn't just about the homework getting physical. It's about the courage to keep learning, to keep trying, even when the answers are hard to find. Months passed, each one a little victory. A form approved here, a meeting went well there, a new phrase learned, a new moment shared. Julien and I had settled into this rhythm of waiting and hoping, but never letting the uncertainty eclipse what we had. Our lives had tangled in ways I hadn't imagined when I first showed up for language lessons. Then, one crisp morning, Julien called me with a voice I'll never forget. Steady, but bright, like a weight had lifted. "Mark, they approved my residency. I can stay." I was sitting at my desk and I swear I nearly fell out of my chair. I wanted to laugh, cry, and kiss him all at once. When I arrived at his apartment that evening, Julien was waiting with that same smile that had first drawn me in, only now it held something deeper: relief, hope, and maybe a little pride. We didn't need words. We just smiled and held each other like we were finally home. Sitting on his couch later, I looked at him and said, "You know, I signed up for these lessons to learn how to say 'Where is the bathroom?' in French. I never thought I'd find something so much more." He laughed softly. "And I never thought I'd find someone who makes me want to stay." That night, we didn't just celebrate the paperwork or the official stamps. We celebrated the messy, beautiful journey that got us here. The stumbles, the doubts, the stolen glances, the homework that was more about heart than language. Looking back, I realized that learning a language isn't just about mastering words. It's about connection, trust, and daring to be vulnerable. Julien taught me that, in ways far beyond vocabulary. We still practice, still make mistakes, still laugh when I mispronounce something ridiculous. But now, every lesson feels like a step forward, not just in French, but in us. And that's the best homework I ever had.